Hey guys, this is April, and today we're going to talk about Egypt. To be specific, we're going to talk about the pyramids, what came before, what came after, did these giant structures come to be. Before I get started, I want to cover something essential about ancient Egyptian culture, and that is the afterlife. This is the overriding concern for ancient Egypt throughout its history. This leads them to be interested in preserving their bodies, their corpses. One of the first things they do to actually do this is they would bury their dead in the sand. When you put a body in the sand, apparently it naturally mummifies it. It turns your body into beef jerky, essentially. It sucks all the water out. Well, this had problems because it was easy for someone to dig up a body, whether it be a thief or an animal. And they were worried by the concern that if these bodies are destroyed, what happens to your spirit? They believed that their corpse held their spirit. It was its house. So what happens when that is destroyed? Does your spirit vanish? This led them to start building tombs to put the bodies in a burial chamber. And when they start doing that, they no longer have the sand to naturally mummify the corpses. So this is what leads them to actually look into artificially mummifying the body. When it comes to the tombs, the first major structures that we see for people that are important are mastabas. Now, when it comes to Egypt, they believed that the kings, the pharaohs, were actual reincarnation of the gods. And there was a big concern that you want to treat their body with respect. You want to make sure that you preserve their spirit for the sake of Egypt. That's part of the reason why we start to see these monumental structures being built for these people with prestige. So the first things that they build for people of high status are mastabas. Mastaba, the literal definition, means bench in Arabic. The thing about mastabas is they're not complicated. They're very simple. They do actually look like a bench that a giant could sit on and rest his tush. When it comes to decorating these structures, they would try to jazz them up. The exteriors would be highly polished with a nice casing, and they could be painted. The insides are decorated as well. On the interior of the mastaba, you might have multiple chambers, at least one for someone to give sacrifices and to do rituals for the person that's buried there to help sustain their spirit. And then underneath these structures, you would have the burial chamber. The pharaohs weren't always pleased by having a mastaba. It wasn't grandiose enough. So they demanded something a bit more over the top, since, well, they believe they are a reincarnation of a god. A mastaba is not fit for someone like that. Along comes a man named Imhotep. And Imhotep is a very important figure when it comes to history. We attribute to him being the first named architect, engineer, and physician. Now the latter is kind of debatable. We actually have a couple other names pop up as far as physician goes, but he is definitely someone that is well-rounded. He's a polymath. The reason we care about Imhotep in the fine arts is the fact that he develops the idea of a step pyramid. Step pyramid, you can imagine it as several mastabas stacked upon one another. So it's just a mastaba upon a mastaba upon a mastaba upon a mastaba. So it's not complicated, but through this technique, this concept, you can make something much more major, much more monumental. Well, the pharaohs still weren't pleased with this. Over time, they become interested in building what we would consider a true pyramid, a pyramid in which there are no steps, but the edges are smooth. There is a smooth transition from the base to the very top point. And the pharaoh that lived during this transitional phase, his name is Snefru, or Snofru, or Sneferu, however you want to pronounce his name. The very first pyramid that we attribute to him, which is kind of debatable, it may have been started by the previous pharaoh, but we call it the Medum pyramid. Initially, when you look at it, it looks like your typical step pyramid. But the only reason that's the case is it's fallen apart. It has deteriorated very quickly. Originally, this would have been a true pyramid. It would have been smooth. But there are multiple problems with building the structure. First off, it was never meant to be a true pyramid. It actually started off as being a step pyramid with just a few steps. Well, that wasn't good enough. So they added more steps to the pyramid, and then they decided to add casing. So the casing is the part of the structure. It's made out of limestone, and it's used to fill in the steps to make the edges smooth. Because this is an afterthought, the foundation for this structure is unstable. The main part of the mastaba, the original, was all on rock, but since they added to the structure, the outer parts of the foundation was on sand. And when you're building something this big, you have to have a super strong foundation. So because of that, the structure lost a lot of its integrity and it just fell apart. Some believe it never was finished, that actually fell apart while it was being constructed. And there's actually several signs for that. The one that is the strongest for that idea is on the interior, usually you have a stele that would have the name of the pharaoh on it that's buried there. When it comes to Medum, there are no names. The steles are blank. The next pyramid that we're going to talk about is bent pyramid. And yes, it's got its name because the angles on it is bent. This is probably my favorite pyramid because it's aesthetically different from the previous pyramids and the pyramids that come after. Now, what happened here is it's assumed that initially they wanted this to be a true pyramid, that there be one single angle that the base would rise up to the top point. Well, apparently they probably were having issues with the steepness of the angle. If they were to keep on going at this angle with the structure, this pyramid would be super tall. Very, very tall. So it would take forever to build. And then the other issue is it'd be very hard to keep stable. So it's assumed that about halfway through creating this structure, they tweak the angle so they can get it finished faster and to add stability to the structure. The last pyramid I'm going to talk about is Red Pyramid. So Sneferu finally has overseen the construction of a true pyramid. This would have been smooth as well. They would have had casing. It would have had a surface quality similar to that we saw on the bent pyramid. On the bent pyramid, the casing is better preserved than on some of the other pyramids that we have seen. Some other things that they would do to these pyramids. For example, the Great Pyramids of Giza. One of them actually had a gold tip, and another one had a base of granite. So these things would have been very, very elegant, very, very beautiful when they were created. They would have looked much different than what they do now. And part of the reason that the smooth surface has come off of these pyramids, most of them, is there was not enough room between the casing and the actual structure of the pyramid. So they had issues when it came to thermal expansion. And then another problem was the cultures that came to live in this area afterwards, they were not concerned about preserving the exterior of these giant pyramids. And essentially, these pyramids acted like mines for limestone. You could actually use limestone for other things other than decoration. You can actually use it for plaster. So people would take advantage of these pyramids as a resource. We eventually get to a point in ancient Egypt that they stop building these ancient pyramids. And there's multiple reasons why this probably happened. First off, the next couple of kingdoms that come into power when it comes to ancient Egypt, the New and Middle Kingdom, they had issues when it came to stability of the government. If you're building a giant pyramid, you have to be a very strong pharaoh, because even though a pyramid in itself is not a complicated structure, you still need to have a lot of control of people. You have to have manpower, you have to have the resources, you have to have the time, you have to have a stable government. If you don't have that, then things are going to quickly fall apart. And because of all of this unrest, they actually lose the knowledge of how to construct these pyramids. One of the big reasons that Giza is so famous, so well known these days, is a lot of the pyramids that you see in Egypt, albeit they would have been true pyramids, they have fallen apart. The pyramids at Giza are very well preserved, so that has made them very, very famous. Also, they're the biggest, so that always helps when it comes to prestige. Another thing that may have happened is there may have been changes in theology. People may have made the transition from, instead of worshiping the pharaoh, the reincarnation god, they got the bright idea of, why not just worship the god himself? So instead of building giant pyramids to worship the pharaohs, they began to build temples. Now, one other thing that may have led to the reduction of building pyramids is, once again, theft. A pyramid is essentially a giant marker to thieves. It's letting everybody know a lot of valuable things are going to be buried here. So this may have also encouraged pharaohs to be buried into what we call rock-cut tombs. So a rock-cut tomb is a tomb that is basically cut out from a cliffside. And we've had one very, very famous pharaoh put in one of these type of tombs. King Tut was actually put into a rock-cut tomb. Actually, when it comes to his tomb in particular, some believe that it wasn't his tomb to begin with, that it was a makeshift tomb, because when people found it, his goods were kind of shoved in there. It seemed like things were rushed. Also, when it comes to King Tut, he wasn't a very prominent king. He died very young, so he wasn't very powerful and very well respected, so why bother to put him in a very elaborate tomb? But that said, he still had lots of beautiful goods buried with him. But even when it came to his tomb, it was actually entered in twice by thieves. Luckily for us, the thieves were thwarted in their actions, but even with these rock-cut tombs, there was issues with theft. Now, it was more difficult to find these tombs and more difficult to access them, but still, when somebody knows that there's something very precious, that there's a treasure nearby, they're going to go out of their way to try to get it by all means possible. So that's all I have for today. If you have any questions that is hard to find the answer to, leave them down in the comments below. Hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I'll see you later.